Hello, and welcome back to the Insight to Revenue podcast. I'm thrilled today to be here after a short hiatus for us with Ben Samuels. He's got a very prestigious background, all the way through from Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Albright, go-to-market fund. He does work with 8 years at WeWork, which he recently left to take on a very cool new challenge with a business called One Mind he's going to talk about as well. Ben, awesome to have you here.
Great. Thanks for having me, Zach. Been looking forward to this. I know you've been traveling a bit and so have I, so it's good to be back in the seat and looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, and I think if I go back to when we first met, which was actually through the Pavilion community, it was one of my favorite folks I've ever seen on stage at one of these events was when I saw you up there talking about the journey you had at WeWork. Obviously very public, some of the amazing growth and such a recognizable and well-known brand, dominant in a space and really created a new space in the market. And then obviously a bit of a roller coaster ride going into bankruptcy, and just the way that you told that story and how you kept that team energized, motivated, engaged with your customers, felt like would be a huge benefit to just share some of that and some other things that you've learned from your experience today. And so I guess as a starting point, you don't have your slides today and you don't have your 45 minutes in the sun, but do you want to talk a little bit about just generally when you'd come into WeWork, kind of what the situation was there and sort of what were kind of some of the main milestones across that 8 years?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a fun story to tell, so I'm always happy to chat about it. I'm usually a slide guy, but I can do it off the cuff here as well. So I joined WeWork in 2017. As you mentioned, I'd spent about 17 years in banking, 10 years in New York, 7 in London, working for 2 global investment banks, running large teams. And I left to go do a little fintech startup. We were 3 guys with a dream, didn't really know how to get office space. I'd never procured office space before. And someone said, check out WeWork. I'd never heard of WeWork. But I walked into the Moorgate location, which is in London, and it was like a Thursday at noon, and the place was like just off the charts with energy, buzz, people sitting together, collaborating on laptops, really like nothing I'd ever seen before. And I thought, this place is really cool. So I put my credit card down and we moved in. And so I spent the year as a member at WeWork before actually joining. And it was a really fun year. We grew all the things that I think WeWork were talking about, community, connectivity, all those things really rang true to me. And I experienced them. I thought, this is just an incredible mission, an incredible brand, and they're doing some really cool things. So at the end of my year with a startup, I'm realizing it wasn't going to scale in the way I wanted it. I'd read that Adam Newman, who was the very famous and infamous CEO, had just raised, I think, his first billion, one of the first of 24 billion. I think he eventually went on to raise a private capital, and they were looking to pivot from B2C to B2B. I think at the time they were an amazing consumer brand in the US and growing globally quite quickly. But in reality, most people were on month-to-month contracts. So in theory, they all could have left the next month and revenues would have effectively been zero. So I think the idea was, look, as we're scaling at WeWork, we need to build revenue backlog. We need to build bigger clients with more predictability of revenue. So I basically took it upon myself to build a business plan for how I would execute sort of an enterprise growth plan for WeWork. I put it together and I pitched it to everyone at WeWork, including getting it all the way up to our CFO, who was a business school alumni of mine, one of our heads of real estate, and I think eventually landed on Adam's desk. And they said, sounds good. You seem to know what you're doing, the product, go. And so I started in March 2017, really with the goal of helping to build out enterprise. And I started probably in my own comfort zone, which was in banking and financial services. And we built that whole business very, very quickly. I think we went from something like a $20 million backlog to about $3 billion of revenue backlog in about 18 months. So it was a period of absolute hyper growth. And we landed really, really well with enterprise. So that was an exciting period of time where we were hiring and growing and literally, as we always say, building the rocket ship while we were in flight. But it felt like that. But it also felt like an incredibly fun, cool challenge. And when you take a step back from all the headlines and all the noise, we were really building a world-class business, right? If you think about real estate, it's a multi-trillion-dollar asset class. 1 billion people worked in office before COVID. And on most people's P&Ls, it's either the number one or the number two cost item on any P&L. You have people and you have real estate. So if you can go to a CEO or CFO and said, I can help you do real estate differently and give your people a better experience, which will mean higher retention, better culture, you have a seat at the table. So this opportunity to be relevant, to create a category and
when you actually
disrupt what
started
was
building that
probably one of the world's biggest asset
enterprise
classes was just
function, and
a once in a lifetime opportunity as I saw it. So I was really psyched to join.
great. And when you think about when you joined and built out what really was, I guess there were people, I assume at that point there was some enterprise sales team, but there really wasn't a strategy to scale it, or was it literally from the ground up?
So there were a couple of people who were at it because Adam had said, "Look, this is an opportunity. We got to go." There were a few very, very smart people in New York who were working on it, and there were a couple of people in London who were getting it off the ground for sure. I didn't start it from scratch, but what I did was I spent the first 2 or 3 months just selling. I just said to the team, "Let me go out, let me do tours, let me get in front of everyone I can because I want to understand what this market needs from us." Right? We have an idea. But in reality, we need to understand it. So I did tours, presentations, took feedback, and there was so much we needed to change. Anything from our legal agreements, which were basically a consumer agreement we probably printed off the website at Staples or something, right? And you get Goldman Sachs or HSBC, and you're like, "Here's our legal agreement." They're like, "Let's get serious for a second. We need to have something much more robust." When we think about the acoustics or privacy, one of the first big deals we did was Citibank's Innovation Tech Hub in London. And they just said, we can't have clear windows everywhere. We're writing stuff on boards. I get it. You guys like the light and this sense of community, but we also need a certain amount of privacy. So it was many things like that we had to kind of break and reshape for a consumer, from a consumer to an enterprise spec. And that almost broke the organization. There was a lot of pain, a lot of tears, but we got there. And I think, what I added to it was not only relationships, but the idea about how to scale it, right? And so we ended up hiring hundreds of people. We grew it really, really quickly. And I think what I helped bring was process structure, strategy, to build, first the BD team, then the overall enterprise team. And then eventually I took on the role to run international. And then, a couple of years later, CRO, global CRO.
And at its peak, how big was the sales organization?
So I have to remember, but look, revenues peaked at about $4 billion. And we were doing sales probably $250 million a month. And I think we were probably upwards of 1,000 salespeople. That included all segments of the business. So we had a consumer business, we had an SMB business, an enterprise business, and eventually a digital business. I think as I took over as CRO, we were more like 600 people. And that then included marketing and sales ops as well. But I'm certain we were well north of 1,000 people at its peak. We hired at such an unbelievable pace. So when I joined the firm, I was employee number 1,500. And I think within about 18 months, we were at almost 20,000 people. Now, the irony of all that, if you look back, we had our first big crisis when we tried to IPO in 2019 and didn't manage to do so. And I think we had a very big restructuring. Adam left. SoftBank came in and new CEOs and everything. We went from something like 20,000 employees to like 5,000 or 6,000, and the sales team shrunk quite considerably. The irony was we ended up doing more revenue with about half the number of people in sales, and certainly 60% fewer people in the overall org. And I think that speaks volumes to how many people in the organization were doing things that were not directly correlated or involved with selling offices.
And I think if you really think about all those transformation points or inflection points across, even in 8 years, which used to be not that long a time. Like I know these days, every 2 years, people are changing roles and the whole world is changing. But, the main theme we wanted to kind of focus on today, which I thought you'd have a really interesting perspective is it's around trust and loyalty, because we find, even if you think about the go-to-market in London and the one in Austin, this kept emerging from every session. And when you talk to people, there's kind of a breakdown in trust in the marketplace these days between buyer and seller. Loyalty is always called into question when economic times are uncertain. And so I think it's really interesting, having heard you tell the story, kind of breaking into two different sides, which are very well connected, which is number one, I mean, even when in high growth, you have huge problems with your customers, right? Because so many companies overextend themselves. Then obviously you go through restructuring. Then obviously the financial challenges and transformation of the company. So you've had to go through a lot of different types of change. Starting with customer, how we always like to start the customer before we talk about ourselves, but in maintaining loyalty and trust with your customer during all those times of change, I guess what are and we can talk about the positive times of growth as well as the kind of bankruptcy times, but what are the kind of things that jump out to you about how do you keep your customers and your credibility when either you're overextending yourself or even when they're reading the headlines and they wonder whether you can just deliver on any of your promises?
No, it was one of the biggest challenges for sure. One of the most important things to tackle and to get right. So just if we take a quick step back to your point about the different phases, when I kind of think about what happened in those 8 years, we actually went through six very, very distinct phases in 8 years, which is a lot of change. And each one of those phases was like a tectonic shift in strategy. They weren't little subtle changes. So we whipsawed internally, and we whipsawed our clients, and we created a very difficult operating environment. No fault of our own. Sometimes, own goals, certainly. But I think it was operating in that environment, which made it really critical to think about our clients, right? What are they going through, and what are our employees going through? So if we start with the client, I think first and foremost, and by the way, the answer is not going to be that different when we get to talk about our employees. The first and foremost is around communication, transparency, and building partnership.
Mm-hmm.
And you often, I think we've realized, you often build much deeper relationships and more trust through the periods of crisis than you do through good times. Through good times, everything's just kind of ticking along, and no one really needs you to explain anything; just need you to kind of deliver. Through the tough times, it's all about relationships and trust, and it's critical that you build those in the deepest, darkest moments. So for me, what mattered the most was communicating early. If there was going to be a problem, we had to let people know. And to your point on hyper growth, we way overpromised on delivery, right? Remember, we're delivering physical real estate. So we have to acquire a building, we have to completely renovate it, we have to be swinging hammers to deliver, the new space, deliver furniture, deliver working HVAC, air conditioning, heat, Wi-Fi. There's a million things that go wrong with that many moving parts. And I think clients know that, especially those in the real estate market, but you've got to tell them early because they need a plan B. You probably have one or two champions at the client, and what you don't want to do is make them look stupid with their own boss, with their own stakeholders. So arming them with all the information allows them to communicate internally on their end, so they don't look dumb. And the moment you make one of your guys look dumb, one of your clients look dumb, you've lost them. You've lost it. It's really, really hard to get back. So for me, it was, let's communicate proactively, communicate early. If we think there's going to be a problem, we tell them, we give them the risks that might go right, and this may not be an issue, and therefore we warned you without unnecessarily, but we want you to know there's a risk this may happen. The building may not be ready on time. Your move-in date may be pushed. The Wi-Fi won't be ready, or we're about to go into bankruptcy. All those things
Yeah.
can really, really impact your client. So for me, it was proactive, candid, obviously always honest and truthful, but really transparent. So one example I'll give you is we before we filed for Chapter 11, obviously we knew we were gonna be filing, those of us on the inside, months before. But a few days before, and we were a public company, so we had to be very careful about what we could and could not say. We brought a few of our clients, what they say, over the wall. So with compliance fully intact and lawyers on each side, signed an NDA, and we wanted to explain to them what was going to happen. So we got teams of, our biggest clients, got them on the phone and said, here's what's going to land on Wednesday. We're going to announce that we're in Chapter 11. Here's what it means for you, and here's what it doesn't mean. We continue to operate. Everything will be fine, but we get to restructure in the background. So the headlines will be awful. You'll be getting 1,000 calls from the people in the building, your chief risk officer, your CFO. Everyone's going to be calling you going, what the hell? Why we at WeWork? Is it all falling apart? Here's what you need to know. Here's why we're doing it. And here's why at the back end of it, we're going to be really better partners than we've ever been, because we'll be fully restructured and we'll be there for the long term. And everyone takes a deep breath, and it's a terrifying moment when you have to communicate something like that to one of your biggest clients. But in reality, when we came out the other end, many of them came back to us and said, you know what? You guys told us what you were going to do. You told us early we could prepare. You did everything you said you were going to do. And now we have much more faith and trust in you than ever before. And that was kind of a moment, like a high five moment. Where we're like, okay, thank God. Because the tendency for most people is hide under the desk.
Yeah.
It's easier, right? It's way
And
easier to hide under the desk than it is to go out and make yourself vulnerable, put yourself in harm's way, and think like you're risking the relationship. And in reality, you're probably saving the relationship.
now over that 8-year period, I assume the competition changed quite a bit. There may have been at some point you felt like we've cornered the market with large clients. There's not a lot of people who can actually deliver at scale. But
Correct.
then I guess the competitive environment started catching up at some point in there. Was there any impact of that in those final years?
Look, it was interesting to see the evolution of competition. I think one thing holds true still to this day. No one can operate in the scale, on a global scale, the way we can, taking down large chunks of space, no matter where they want to be, whether that's in Berlin or whether that's in Singapore or San Francisco. We have people who come to us and they can take 100,000 square feet or more. I think, it was quite public when TikTok was coming out of COVID, and it was in the Irish Times. They called us and said, we need room for 1,000 of our employees to come back. We gave them 2.5 buildings, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's just no one who could turn around 200,000 square feet, or maybe it was more, on turnkey, on flexible terms, right? So I think we always owned that part of the market. However, we faced increasing competition in every single one of our markets at the small and mid-size end. So competition became fierce everywhere, and we had to battle that, and that wasn't easy, because if you're a freelancer and you have a one-person office, or an SMB, with a 20-person office, your ability to pick up your laptops and move across the street to the brand new building that just opened up, it's so easy. Switching costs are
Yeah.
incredibly low when you're that nimble. So we had to find ways of adding value, right? In our community, how we pitched our community events, the network, the ability to use an all access pass all around the world, the ability to move offices anywhere around the world. We call it spend portability. All these things, we had to constantly reinvent our value prop, because if we didn't, we definitely would have been we would have suffered a lot more from our competition.
Yeah, and it's interesting how much those themes have become much more commonplace as far as strategy. And obviously, community was a big deal because you had these actual people in all these buildings. But now, in almost any business, not bringing in customers, communities to give input in the business, especially in times of trouble at the right times, and then using that community to create much more of an experience is something
Yeah,
it seems like you were really leading the edge on. And then that's how you learn of where you can add additional value, right? That's how you learn where
absolutely.
you can differentiate. Um, so
And
that,
the other thing I would say about community is, when things go wrong. So we talked about trust and transparency when things go wrong with your key clients, but it's not only about the main stakeholders, right? You want that trust, transparency, and relationship to be all the way down the org, all the way from the person who sits on the community desk. So let's say at one point, we signed this huge deal with HSBC. They came into our Waterloo building. They were building the B2B bank of the future, digital bank of the future. They had like 1,500 people in our Waterloo office. Of course, we had the stakeholders at the real estate, we had the stakeholders at the exec team, but actually the community team were the people, were the ones who saw the HSBC employees every single day. And they did a survey of happiness. They compared their Canary Wharf HQ with the WeWork um, building. The happiness, the satisfaction, the engagement was so much higher at the WeWork building, that even if we screwed up a couple of things on delivery or operationally, the teams were so happy in the building, there was no way you were going to rip them out, right?
yeah, and I think that's you really tapping into a different value prop when you're talking about employee engagement, productivity, innovation versus just, convenience, or, we're
Right.
maximizing people in squares.
And we always tried to push that down, right? We needed to make sure you have all the way down the value chain that sense of focus on the client. Here's what's happening in the relationship. So we had our account managers who would always spend time with the community team on the ground. So some of our clients had 20 different locations, right? And part of the job of the account manager is not only to make sure that their stakeholder is feeling comfortable, but actually they're pushing at the building level to say, how is that team doing? Have you bought them breakfast this month? Have you done an event for them? Have you invited them to things, right? because it's so important that it's bottoms up and top down. I always felt that was super critical to maintaining our relationships, because it would be way too easy to put the number on a spreadsheet and say, oh, the price per desk is 10% cheaper across the street, we should move. But then you would have a rebellion from the people in the
Yeah.
building if we kept them happy, and then the business wouldn't do it. So I always felt like you just have to really be thoughtful that all the way down, from all the way to the top, all the way down to the stakeholders and the users, got that experience that WeWork was something different. It was something special, and they cared. They knew us as an account.
Yeah, and so much I want to dig into. We got a few minutes left, and I want to make sure and hit a couple topics. So, as we talked about, it makes total sense that you would be as your communication around change management internally is going to be so critical, and being transparent and delivering on your promises, being credible. It seems like those are the themes that you would, as far as keeping your army willing to still take the hill, and believe that you're going to have a healthy company and there's going to be jobs for people on the other side. But when we look at change and change management, very often it comes down to, in a sales organization, to the first line managers, right? Like that's the railway station. Everything back from the customer and everything down from the organization. Now, I know when you started, you could be much more present, right, out in the field. But obviously, as you scaled out to 1,000 people, it's going to be impossible to be everywhere at once. So, just looking at your first line managers and coaching in particular, I'd just love to hear your thoughts on what did you look for people at that front line position, and how did you maintain culture and communication and all these principles through essentially what I imagine was probably about 100 or 80, sales managers at the front line.
Yeah, no, I think it was an interesting challenge all the way through. But I'll tell you, I'll try to put it this way for you. So when I think about the team as it was in the last 3 or 4 years, right? The success of the team that we've had through all the challenges and changes, I looked for a certain number of things when I was hiring people. One, resilience, right? We needed to know that people we were hiring for were going to be able to survive and thrive under a constantly changing environment. I remember, back in the day when I was hiring people, I would say to them, "Hey, I'm going to hire you for this job, but it may turn out that by the time you arrive after gardening leave or the paperwork or whatever, you might actually have a totally different job." I think we're moving so quickly. I can't guarantee that you're going to be doing exactly that role. Now, if that interests you and that excites you, you're in the right place. If that terrifies you, don't come. Don't leave your current job. Like, we're moving too quickly for me to be able to guarantee exactly how it's going to go. So we weeded out a bunch of people through that comment, and most were like, "No, I just want to be part of what you guys are doing." The second thing I looked for, was grit. People who could really fight through tough times. I think we made so many mistakes when we were hiring in the hyper growth days of people with very, I don't know if I'd call it fancy resumes. So they had great pedigree on the resume of places they'd worked, but in reality, when it became tough, they just folded. Right, the companies they worked at before, I think they were fed, or they had momentum, or the algorithms did the work, and they were kind of custodians of that. When
Yeah.
you're doing dirty real estate deals, you've got to just dig deep. You got to fight through. And there were just so many people who came from these really great tech names who just couldn't hack it. So we purged a lot of that, which I was grateful for. And we rebalanced into a combination of real estate people and entrepreneurs. So that brings me to the third point. I always look for people who have real accountability and ownership. I think people who feel really like they have some sort of stake in the business, whether it be actual equity or just feel like they're part of a team that owns the business, is so critical. Because I think as we went through really tough times, those who felt, oh, the company is doing this to me, or Adam has done this to me, or SoftBank is doing this to me, they, one, were really unhappy and became very unproductive, and we had to exit them. Those who said, look, I choose to be here. I want to see this mission through to the end. I get that we're about to go into chapter 11, but I want to be part of that team that comes out the other side and makes WeWork profitable for the first time in its history. I want that on my CV, whether I stay at WeWork long term or not. Like, I want to be part of that. Totally different perspective, and it creates a very different culture. So I look for people who had real ownership and accountability, along with all the other attributes, and that's the culture we built. High performance, holding people accountable for performance, owning the losses when they happen. But when bad things happen, you have choice. You can leave, but if you stay, you're all in. And that, I felt, was really important. And I think hopefully I modeled that behavior. I showed up to work with high energy, with high focus. There were good days and bad days, but I think I modeled that behavior and I expected it from everyone else. And I communicated very regularly. I didn't wait for an all hands at the end of the quarter. Weekly, we had very big weekly sales team meetings, and of course, providing feedback on a more regular basis.
Yeah, and coming full circle in the last minute or two here, and I know you can't talk about the future of AI in sales or all the other functions in that time, but maybe a teaser before maybe our next conversation down the road. But yeah, talk to us about what you obviously had the entrepreneurial bug prior to WeWork. You got another swing on the other side with a lot of lessons learned, and you're going into AI, which is obviously a crowded, competitive space. But tell us just a little bit about OneMind, why it's intriguing for you, and what you think is going to, what are the exciting things you see in the next couple years, and quick teaser, and then we'll promise to have you back on to talk more on this topic later.
Great. So in a nutshell, while I was sitting at WeWork, I recognized our need to innovate, to be able to grow much more efficiently while reducing costs. And I was just looking for ways to drive conversion, raise win rates, shorten sales cycles. And I begged our head of tech to assign someone to the sales team that would just watch everything we do and then introduce AI and help us be more efficient. We're a very analog business. We closed 4,000 deals a month. It was heavy lifting and we got it done. But man, we could be better. So when I met Amanda Kalo, who was the founder and former CEO of Sixth Sense, she started this company, or is the CEO of this company called OneMind, which are these digital superhumans. So they're the face, voice, and brain of your best sales reps who can sit on the website or join Zoom calls. When I saw that, I recognized the value immediately. I didn't have to be an AI specialist or a tech genius to recognize that what she was providing was transformational to the kind of sales we were doing. Quick snapshot: 600,000 people visit WeWork's website per month, let's just say. Of that, 2% leave their details. So great, we get 10,000 people who leave information about calling back. What about the other 590,000 people who don't leave their details? What is going on with them? Who's speaking to them? Why are they here? Why are they leaving? I need to understand that. Someone once said I have revenue rage. And it is. I was mad. I'm mad. Now with an AI being deployed on the website, the AI can have that conversation with all 590,000 people to say, can I help you? Can I bring you in? Can I answer questions? Now think about conversions going up. The same marketing dollars being spent, but your conversions are going through the roof. That's an incredibly high ROI proposition. All right.
Yeah,
And so it excited me.
and just scratching the surface. Ben, thank you so much for coming on the program. Really excited to talk again soon and see what you and Amanda are doing with OneMind. I'm sure it's going to be making waves. So thanks again, and talk soon.